All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Self Leadership Lab. Today, as most of my guests, were in for a treat because but this guy is amazing. He's a former pastor, a musician, an author. He brings so much to the table, but more importantly, he's a man of God. And it has a story that I think we all need to hear because it's a story of redemption, it's a story of grace, it's a story of self-leadership in a nutshell. So today's guest is Dustin Kleinschmidt. And Dustin, welcome to the show. Why don't you give everyone a brief introduction, and then we'll get into all the amazing things that you're doing and the Lord's done in your life.
Yeah, Bobby, thank you so much for having me. And I've been looking forward to this since we did that intake conversation a while back, and we could have talked for hours. We had so much fun. And so I'm excited to dive into this. Yeah. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. My mom was a product of the 70s. So very much like your typical hippie. I mean, from what I understand, when I was a baby, I was at like sit-ins for like nuclear power plants being built. Like my mom was doing sit-ins and I'm crawling around. So like that was kind of an environment. My mom had grown up in a heavily Catholic environment, church, went to Catholic school. And so she had kind of pushed religion aside. So I didn't have any kind of faith background or any sense or need for ministry or the church, or it just was never even in my ecosystem. But I did have a very traumatic childhood, abusive stepfather, absentee father. You know, it was really my mom and I most of my adolescence from like middle school on. And then in high school, a friend of mine started inviting me to his youth group. And, it took him a little bit in some different angles. He went from, hey, come check out my youth group to, hey, I got a girl who's got a friend. And that really became the catalyst to get me to go to church. And within a few times attending this youth group at a pretty big church in Southern California and a pretty dynamic youth ministry. I wasn't captured by the dynamics. I was captured by the relationships and the friendships. And I found there a family that I really had never had, and leaders who were going to disciple me and encourage me, and be really honest about it. Like they weren't going to just gloss over or paint a nice face on it. We were going to talk about real raw issues. So I actually was formed in a way that I think that many Christians aren't, unfortunately. Like it wasn't just about what are you going to learn about your Bible. It was like, no, like, are you struggling with lust? Like, are you looking at pornography? What are you doing about those things? Are you walking in honesty with yourself and with others, and having to wrestle through all of those things in a really healthy way. So that really set the tone for me. And, I wasn't a great student. High school, I barely got through. I started going to college, and then to show you how committed I was to college, I started dropping classes that were too far apart from one another. Like I was at a college that was like on a hillside, and I was like, that English class is up the hill. I'm not going up there. Like that's too far away. So it really wasn't like, I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no direction, dropped out of college, was working full time, bought a guitar because girls like guys who play guitar, started playing guitar. Moved in with our college pastor. He and I became roommates. And the joke is I knew 4 chords on a guitar and he knew 3. So that made me the music guy. And so we were doing this really intensive small group type discipleship thing for college students in dorms. And our house that we were renting together kind of was like the hub of the kind of the leadership gatherings and stuff. And so I was leading worship, and our house was the hangout spot. It's where I ended up meeting my wife, is in that college group. And again, just more formation, developing the ability to lead people and to lead worship, and a passion for community, a passion for following Jesus. To really shorten the story, I got dared to write some songs, wrote a few songs on a whim. We performed them at a camp. No one booed us off the stage, which kind of surprised us. That turned into me pursuing a career in music from there, and developing bands, and ultimately ended up with a production and record deal. Grew up in Los Angeles, so this is where this is all playing itself out. And then spent about 7 years. I was working kind of as an intern at the church and like part-time roles, but I was really pursuing a career in music business. So I was, working with this production company, recording songs, writing songs, playing shows, played all the clubs in Hollywood, or not all of them, but a lot of them. Had leather pants, which is really embarrassing now to admit. By the way, leather pants don't breathe at all. So do not suggest wearing them on a warm day in any way, shape, or form. So yeah, I did that. And I was actually on stage in a club in Hollywood, club called the Coconut Teaser. And was in the middle of it was like probably a Tuesday night or something, some random, there's probably 20 people in the room. And it was like, God was like, it wasn't audible, but it may have well as been, where he was just like, okay, we're done with this. And I remember going like, what, done with what? Like I remember in that moment being confused, and went home and started processing with my roommate and mentor and just said, hey, I think I'm done with the rockstar thing. And he's like, that's really interesting. He's like, I've been wanting to hire a full-time student ministries worship pastor to help develop a culture of worship and disciple our students musically as well as theologically in what it means to worship Jesus. And he's like, I had thought of asking you. He's like, but I didn't want to interrupt this direction you felt like you were supposed to go. And so we pitched it to our elders and they hired me. Surprisingly, it really was a surprise. And so that was my first, like, that's when I moved into vocational ministry. Again, like I didn't have all the theological training. It wasn't something where I was like growing up going, one day I'm going to be a pastor. Like that was never it. And so then over the years, as I was doing ministry, it was like, okay, I got to go get a theological education. I need to backfill some of this stuff from where I landed. And so spent a lot of time doing that. I was in that role for 7 years. And then when the economy changed in California, that role was cut. And we ended up in the Dallas area at a church that had planted like 5 years earlier, but was growing really fast. And they hired me as kind of their small groups and worship guy. And we handed off the worship pretty quickly because it was growing so fast and I couldn't do both. And then I really was all about like spiritual formation. How do we grow in our relationship with God? How do we develop good spiritual disciplines and learn how to live in community? And I did that for another 7 or so years in a leadership environment that was far less healthy than I expected. Coming from something very healthy, you kind of don't know what you have until you're not in it anymore. And had some real concerns about the leader of this church after the fact. Like once I got there, started to realize, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And so that led to some tension along the way. And then after being there 7 years, they sent us to plant a church about 30 minutes away in the town that we still live in now called Murphy. And we planted that church, launched with about 20 to 30 people in my living room at the house we were renting. My daughter's room was the nursery. Our upstairs media room was the kids ministry. And we did that for a total almost about 4 years, but COVID came in the middle of all of that. And so we had moved out of our house. We had moved into a middle school. COVID hits. Now we're pushed back into a home. And it's kind of like trying to, like, what do we do? Where are we going? And ultimately realized that once the COVID thing settled, we were going to have to basically start over again, and that wasn't going to be the best decision. And in the midst of that, while that's all playing itself out, coincidentally, the church I'd come from, not in LA, but here in the North Texas area, that senior pastor had resigned, and it had come out that he had been having an affair, and that church was in the middle of a pretty significant implosion. And so ultimately I was asked to come back and to help them to kind of revitalize that church, which we knew, my wife and I prayed and talked and knew it was going to be hard, but ultimately decided that we felt like God was calling us to go back there. And so we went back, and that was by far the hardest 3 years of my life. And it led to burnout and depression and all kinds of crazy things. I've never had so many obstacles and challenges. And so I did my best to serve and lead that church. And after 3 years, and I talk about this in my book, after an elder meeting, I left and called my wife and said, I just don't see any way forward. I'm done being the bad guy. I'm done fighting. I'm over it. And so I gave my resignation and stepped out of ministry thinking, okay, cool, now I can breathe. And then actually it was a couple of months after I stepped out of ministry that panic attacks and all of these things that I'd never really experienced hit me. Started seeing a counselor, spiraled into depression, had to go on medication, like just an insane amount of things. But in all of that, God began to really expose in me these things that these expectations that I had of him that were just not right. They just were not right. They were not of him. And I had built this kind of quid pro quo where it was like, well, God, I'm doing what you told me to, so it should work itself out. And when it didn't, I was really angry at God, really angry. And there was a lot of WTF conversations going on between me and God about like, hey, this is like, I did what you told me to. And this is supposed to work out. And he was super gracious and direct in saying, you're doing a great job articulating all your disappointments to me, but I want you to start examining your expectations. Do I ever promise that things are going to go well, even when you're faithful? And to be fair, in scripture, it's actually quite the opposite, that you could be the most faithful and things don't turn out necessarily the way you want them to. And that ultimately led to the book and this idea of like, okay, this life, the book's called The Wilderness Way, but the idea that this life is the wilderness, that we are in between, being in slavery and full restoration. It's what theologians often call the already but not yet. Like we have these promises before us, but the life that we live is always going to be a mix of beauty and brokenness. And sometimes in the same day, like it's something that we have to navigate, and to have a more healthy expectation of each day. What it gave me was freedom from trying to get out of the hard things, and instead begin to start focusing on what is God doing in the midst of them. Because if my goal isn't just to get out of it because it's just part of life, whether I, facilitated it, whether I shot myself in the foot or else someone else shot me in the foot, the issue is what can I learn in this, and what's God doing in the middle of this? Because in the wilderness with Israel, he rescues them from from slavery to Egypt, and he tells them about the promised land, and then they spend 40 years in the wilderness. And that wilderness was both brokenness and beauty, but God was always with them, and he provided for them, and he directed them. And so he was an ever-present force. And so my encouragement to myself, and what I'm sharing and encouraging others, is if God's with you in it, then let's start with looking at where God is, even in the midst of really, really hard things, And so it's that the tension between, it's not going, oh, well, bad things happen and I'm just going to like paint a rosy face on it. But it's also not wallowing in these hard things. It's lamenting honestly and saying, this stinks, and yet you are with me. And, we see this in Psalms all the time. The psalmists look almost bipolar in there, like, where are you, God? What is going on? Smite my enemies. And then literally 2 verses later, it flips and they're like, yet I will trust you. And I believe, I hold to you. And so it's learning how to live that way. And for me, I just have found a significant amount of freedom in it. That when challenging things come along, and whether that challenging thing is sitting in traffic when I want to be when I'm late for something, or that challenging thing could be my friend's family's falling apart and I'm sitting with him, or whatever it would be, all those things that life brings, in its messiness. There's a measure of, okay, Lord, you're in the middle of this. I want to see you. I want to be faithful to you. I want to walk with you, and I want to do my best to display you to the world around me in every circumstance.
Yeah, man, what a beautiful story. And I hate to say it, it's kind of refreshing to see that someone in your position and the positions that you held, come into some of the same problems that we all do. Because as a pastor, I'm assuming you counseled a lot of people on burnout, depression, anxiety, all these things, but yet they can happen to all of us. Yeah. But the beautiful thing about it is, now that you've kind of come through it and you see the wilderness and you see, how you responded to it, then you're probably more adept and grateful and able to, help others in this process along the way. And, when we first spoke, we talked a lot about this, because in the Christian community, a lot of times it's so much focus on problems. A sermon after sermon is we all struggle, or we all have hardships. We all have these kind of things. And while that's true, do you think that kind of focus that's done in ministry today may be counterproductive to healing and reliance on God and seeing, the beauty in the wilderness, as you wrote about in your book?
Yeah, I think there's two extremes, right? And I kind of alluded to them, but there's the extreme of everything sucks, life always sucks. Why me? Why this? It's because of the Democrats, or it's because of the Republicans, or if we just had this guy or that thing or this law or whatever. Like there's this kind of that side of it, right? And what it reveals in us is the desire, like Tim Keller once said, our primary idol is really comfort. The thing we worship more than God is comfort. And so all of those things, when we like all the culture war things and all the fighting that we see going on, a lot of it is a clamoring for control in order to grab onto comfort, because we want to feel safe and secure. Every human being does. And the church is no different. Like there's a part of it that's that. And so you hear this orientation in some churches about the hard things and how, and it can be very pessimistic. And there's kind of a loss of but the same power that conquered the grave lives inside of you, right? The Spirit lives in us, and Jesus is already conquered. Yes, we're not experiencing the fullness of it, but he's present and he's with us and he's leading us and he's providing us, right? There's that side of it. There's also another side of it where, you see people in church life who go through really hard things, but rather than being willing to like experience that and go like, oh, this is really hard, they try and skip over that. And again, like, I don't want discomfort. I don't want to feel pain. And so they just paint a Romans 8 verse on it. Like, well, God works all things to the good. And they're almost like trying to avoid real pain or real lament. And so I think there's a space in between there where, like, a great example you see in the Bible is, so Jesus, he gets a note from someone that one of his best friends, Lazarus, is sick and like not doing well. And he waits. He doesn't go to heal Lazarus, and Lazarus dies, and they go 4 days later. And both Mary and Martha, Lazarus's sisters, come to Jesus and said, where were you? If you were here, if only you were here, our brother would still be alive. And he has this kind of interaction with the two sisters. And then it says he goes to where they've buried Lazarus, and he sees all the people crying. And it says that Jesus wept. It's the shortest verse in the Bible, which is really interesting. Like I think it's in John, like he put it there for a reason. One, Jesus knew what he was going to do. Like, spoiler alert, he raises Lazarus from the dead, but he knew he was going to do that. Like, it's not like Jesus was like, what am I going to do? Oh, I know, I'll raise him from the dead. Like, he went with a plan that's clear in how it was written. And yet he still allows himself to feel. It says he got angry and he wept. So he was angry, not at the people, he was angry at death and angry at seeing suffering, seeing the fullness of what human beings were not designed to have to walk through. This is all a result of Genesis 3 and the brokenness and sin. And so Jesus allowed himself to feel that, like and again, it's not crocodile tears. Like, if Jesus is God, he's not faking it to just like to be an example. He's really feeling those things. And so he allows himself to feel it, and then he raises Lazarus from the dead, right? And so there's a cool picture of this, like, yes, feel the pain, be honest, and yes, God is making all things new. And those two things have to live in tension with one another. And we need to be careful, to your point, of not always living here or always living here. There's always a but God. It's when you transition from Ephesians 3 to Ephesians 4, Ephesians 4 says, but God, being rich in mercy and kindness. And so it's like, I love but Gods, because it means that, like, God's in it. Like, this may be going on, but God. And so I think that, like, the church hasn't always done a good job of living in that middle, because it's gray, and we don't like gray. Like, we want black or white. I want it's bad or it's good. Like, just tell me. And life is, as you know, is much more nuanced and much more challenging. And we need to be both inspired and honest simultaneously. And so how do we cultivate environments where we're safe and free to be that? And I think that's the challenge.
Yeah. And that's an interesting passage as you broke up too, because I think it teaches us so much about, our self-leadership. And, I mean, so you got this situation, apparently that was Christ's best friend, and he heard the news and he waited. And well, why did he wait? Well, we don't really know, but it shows that you've got to take time, right? And so oftentimes when we have something bad in our lives, we just keep pressing. So I think it teaches us to kind of wait sometimes like more action. And I know as both of us as coaches, we're all about action, but sometimes the best action is inaction, and just taking that pause. And then, like you said, I liked how you put it, that, he gave it the appropriate amount of time. He cried, and then he got on with it, and then he took the action. So sometimes I think that whole pause, lament, to use your word, and then take an action on it is what we need to do. But what I don't see is the pause or the take action. All I see is lament.
Interesting.
And I've been really delving into the life of Christ lately, because I want to find what it's like to be a man. We always say, hey, as Christians, we say we want to live like Jesus, but what does that mean? And I think a lot of times we gloss over the stuff that's there. And of course, it's, fairly limited, right? So you have to kind of jump to some conclusions. But, I look at things like this, and then I look about like when I was depressed and I was anxious, I didn't do any of that pattern that we just discussed. It was always like lament, which meant, and if I did take action, it was more. Did you see this in kind of your journey when you kind of fell down? Because obviously, I mean, you had a passion for the ministry that you were doing. You had a good intention, but did that good intention kind of get overshadowed because you let your lament take over? Seeing what was in there, seeing how you could be a better leader, how you could maybe influence change a little more.
Yeah, great question. I do think so. So I think it depends on, God's wired everyone uniquely. And so like I can use myself and my wife are good opposites in this. So my wife will, like, left to her own devices, probably wouldn't spend a lot of time in deep self-reflection. Like, she's not going to dig under the surface a lot. And because that's just not it. She's just kind of is who she is. Like, she's not super introspective. She does introspect, but she's not like, man, I just want to know. I'm very much the opposite. Like, I'm always looking for the thing under the thing under the thing. And so again, both of those things have there's some beauty in it, and there's some brokenness. There's a shadow side. And so for me, I resigned from the church I was at. I jump, we start visiting another church. I start having panic attacks. I jump in with a counselor because I'm like, I'm not doing well. And then, like any good counselor, it's like, okay, let's start unpacking some of your childhood trauma. Let's start digging into those things. And it was really good. But then I took it and went too far with it, because in my mind, again, these kind of subtle transactional things that are going on inside of me that at the time I'm not aware of, is me going, okay, I'm going to dig in. I'm going to figure out, I'm going to life map the crap out of this thing. I'm going to figure out what's wrong. What happened? What do I got to do to resolve it? So then I can get better, and then I can be fine. And all of that is good in concept. But like so many things, it's like a golf swing. The harder you try to swing at it, the worse the swing gets. And for me, what happened is I was so focused and so fixated on figuring it out so that I could heal, that it wasn't enough pause. I wasn't allowing myself just to experience things. And I was pushing and pushing and pushing, which actually I think facilitated the spiral in many ways. And it was funny because I remember sitting in my counselor's office and we're talking, and he just goes, okay, I'm calling time out. He's like, we're done digging into your past for a little while. Like, you need a timeout. You need to breathe. And he exposed to me that I was kind of like, I was doubling down. And so I did see that. I did see that like what it produced was, like I had gone for so many years acknowledging my childhood, but not really allowing myself to have experienced it. I went from that to a deep dive into all of it. And it went from, it was a thing, to almost hopelessness. Like, I'm just too screwed up. It's too far gone. Like, what, I should have been doing this in my 20s. Now I'm in my 50s doing this. What the, you know what I mean? Like, it was so far off the rails, that I needed to kind of find an equilibrium and come back. And again, that it goes back to that, like, it's more art than science. We are beautifully complex creatures. And God has crafted us uniquely and specifically and dynamically complicated. Like the you that you are today is going to be different, is different than the you were yesterday. And it's different than the you're going to be tomorrow. And that's going to be a compilation of your own self-leadership. It's going to be your interactions with people, good and bad. It's going to be, and so you start thinking about all of the complexity and the layers of all of that in us. Again, things that we do to ourselves, things that are done to us that we have no control over, and how God is governing all of that, and in the middle of it all, and at the same time has given us agency. He's like, hey, I gave you a brain, I gave you free will, I gave you a heart. Like, you get to make some of these decisions. You get to choose whether you're going to let you had no control over what happened with your stepdad. But you do have a choice as to whether or not that's going to define the next week and the next month, and how you react to your kids and how you live and love going forward and all of those things, right? And so there's this crazy thing when you start to peel it back and realizing that we're so complicated, and yet at the same time, we don't have to live in all of those weeds. We can, like you're talking about, like, okay, wait a minute. Yes, all of these things may be true, but there's still a God of hope, and he's still present. And I can fix my eyes on that and on him rather than on all of these other things. And I bet if I fix my eyes there, like I'm going to experience gratitude. I mean, there's all the science about gratitude now, right? Like that if we take time each day to be grateful, like it rewires neural pathways. Like, how crazy is that? And so, like, the Bible's like, yeah, I've been telling you guys this for 2,000 years, right? And we're like, oh, science is finally teaching us something. So I do think that all that stuff plays in, and it is a lot of it is, knowing yourself, being willing to examine yourself. How are you uniquely wired? What are the great giftings about that? And then what are the shadow sides? How do you run in the gifts and protect against the shadows? I think though all of that kind of works together, at least in my journey it has, and it's ongoing. Like, I don't think it'll stop until the day I take my last breath and take my first breath in eternity. I'm always going to be growing and learning and changing.
Yeah. I found the same thing, and I find it encouraging now. That whole growth and the potential of change and development. Whereas before I saw it as scary because I didn't equal enough. And, I know we talked prior to us taping this today that, for me, you and I are very similar. It seems like, I'm very analytical. I want to dive into the why of everything. And when I was at my darkest, and I have an opposite kind of upbringing than you. I was growing up in the church, was bathed in scripture. So I had all that implanted in my subconscious, but then I chose as an adult to turn away from it for many years. So it was that dichotomy that I knew I was doing wrong, but so through all that process, even though I wasn't in church, I wasn't in the scripture, I had basically turned from God. There was always that going on in the back of my head. And at my lowest, I kept remembering that the thought that was the most prevalent was I'd gained the whole world but lost my own soul. And I know I've said this on the show many times, that's typically about salvation, but in this case, it was the way I was living my life. Like I had done everything. I was searching for things that were successful, but yet I didn't feel successful inside. And where I'm going with this is this simplistic thing that helped me the most was one day that thought got replaced with turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face. The old hymn, I know you're a musician, so you gotta know this. But the things of earth will grow strangely dim. Well, the things of earth were all the things that I had gained before, but lost my own soul. So that little simple, for me, it was, the Bible and then an old hymn. And I know you have a similar thing. So what was the simple thing that not only helped you, and I say simple is simple in words, but hard in practice, but that kind of turned you from that into something that like continues to encourage you today? Because like to this very day, that hymn, every time I hear it, I get goosebumps. Saying it right now, I'm just I'm just like energized. And I know you have a similar one, so please share that with us.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few of them that come to mind. I'll get to the Psalm 37 one that we've talked about. But so, in my book, I talk about a thing called target fixation, which I don't know if you've ever ridden motorcycles before. So I went through a dirt bike phase in my early 30s because I couldn't afford a dirt bike as a kid. And so then when I could afford a dirt bike, I went all in, and we would go up to the desert with a bunch of families and we go riding. And you learn quickly about this thing called target fixation, which is wherever your eyes fix is where that bike is going to go. And so I remember once we got out there, it was like a Thursday night. We were going to be there for the weekend, and we unpacked the bikes, and I'm amped because it's like, we have 2 young kids, we have a camper and stuff. And I'm like, I'm ready. I want to go play. So I put on my gear and I jump on my bike, and we have this kind of little track around where we would camp in the middle of the desert. And I take off, and, I'm cruising, and I'm going to, I hit this little jump, and there's like a yucca, like a desert yucca tree sitting there. And I'm coming over, and I'm a little sideways, and I start looking like, oh no, I don't want to hit that. And my whole bike steers into it, smacks it. I'm in an ER with a dislocated shoulder, like all that kind of fun stuff. But I think what the point is that wherever you fix your gaze is where you're going to go. And, Hebrews talks about this where it says, and I think this is where that Psalm actually came from, like, fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith. And before that, he talks about, the writer of Hebrews talks about taking off all the things that hinder you. So like, take off the old stuff, take off the things that hinder you, and then fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith. Take a firm grip with your tired hands, strengthen your weak knees, like be ready, aim at it, and then focus your attention. And so I think for me, it has been that journey of like, okay, where my tendency is to fixate on what I don't have. My natural disposition is to see the gaps. There's like, oh man, but if we could then it would be really cool. I have that contrarianness in me, which is a gift in many ways, because it allows me to see things others don't see, and allows me to, avoid potholes in life and all those kinds of things. But it also can be a thing where I start to fixate on it. I start to fixate on what I don't have, and I miss what I do have. And so to fix my eyes on Jesus as the author and perfecter of my faith, or as Psalm 37, and you and I have talked about this before, has become really my life passage. And I think it's the most, it's 37 verses 3 and 4 primarily. And I think it's this most simple, clear articulation of what it means to walk with God, which is Psalm 37 says, trust in the Lord and do good, dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. And then it goes on to say, delight yourself in the Lord. And so trust in the Lord, like he's God, I'm not God. First and foremost, like I don't get a capital G next to my name. He does. He created the universe. I didn't. He governs all things. I don't. He knows everything. I don't. Trust in the Lord. Do good. Morally, ethically, like don't rob, don't steal, don't cheat, don't try to end around, like do what's right. There's a very obvious moral code. Love God, love others, right? Like you could just keep it as simple as that. So do good. Dwell in the land. And this is a big one for me. Israel knew about a promised land, and they always were looking either forward to where they wish they were or back at what they used to have. But dwelling in the land is being where you are. Like, so what does faithfulness to today look like? Right now, you and I having this conversation, my job is to be present here. I can be very much present in a space and thinking about the thing I have to do 2 hours from now. And that's not healthy. And it's not healthy in ministry. It's not healthy as a husband. It's not healthy as a father. Like, it's like, okay, so dwell in the land. I'm here right now. Later on, I've got another Zoom meeting kind of thing. And then I'm going to go hang out with my daughter. And I want to be fully present for that. Tonight, my wife and I are going to have dinner. I want to be fully present for that. I want to dwell in the land. And then my favorite verse, it may be right now in the whole Bible, is befriend faithfulness. The idea of making faithfulness our best friend. That Jesus said, it says that when we step into eternity, we want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. It isn't going to be well done, good and extraordinary servant. Like, my job is to be faithful to what I've been entrusted with. I'm a steward of my life. I'm a steward of every breath. I'm a steward of the people God's entrusted to me. I'm a steward of the message he's given me. And so stewarding faithfulness by just befriending it, like, okay, what does faithfulness look like? I don't have to have all the answers. I don't have to figure out all the problems. I don't have to figure out the Iran US war. Like, I mean, I could care about it. It matters. but it's not I don't have to figure that out, but I do have things in my world that I got to be responsible for, that I need to be faithful to moment by moment, day by day. And I'm going to befriend that. I'm going to make that my primary goal. And that has just simplified my life so much. And it allows me when I get into but what about, and how are we going to pay for it? And what if like all of those things that can start to clutter, it allows me to clear that away and just say, okay, Lord, I just want to trust you. Like, you are who you are. And I want to be faithful to what you put in front of me. So help me to do that. By your Spirit, help me today to just be who I'm supposed to be and not try to be any more or any less than that. And it has been like revolutionary.
No, I love that so much, and I especially like your explanation of dwell in the land, because I think that is such a missing element to so many people. Because I mean, most people, whenever they have a problem, they want to get out of it, and they see the future, or and that's where the anxiety comes in, and it's like, if you are where you are, I mean, you're a coach now. I mean, how many clients come to you and they want a major life change? They want to burn the boats. They want to be the thing that they think is going to give them peace. But I tell people, you got to be where you are right now.
Yes.
Another concept a pastor talks about is flower where you're planted, which would be congruent to dwell in the land. I mean, where you're at right now. And then, like I said, the hope for that is obviously none of this is possible without, loving God, which is, that's one of the two greatest commandments, of course, as well. But, but then I like what you say, befriend faithfulness. You told me that when we talked a couple months ago, but like it really, something clicked to me right now, because the daily journey, the betterment, it's not always going to go to plan. And this goes about what we talk about. And if that's all you dwell on, but take that small win. Was I faithful? Did I steward my time, my resources? And, the world today is screaming about presence and all this stuff. Well, it sounds to me, it's very simple. Be where you are and do with what you've got at this time. That there's nothing in there that says you have to be stuck there. No, it's just at this time and place, this is where you are. And I know, like that was a huge revelation to me, because I always was a what's next kind of guy. Even my elementary school, I think it was kindergarten, there was a note that my teacher wrote, because back in the 80s, teachers were
they wrote notes.
Yeah. They were a little bit more direct than they might be today. But I remember it. It said that the problem with me is I always want to know what's next. Well, yeah, that's a problem as a 6-7-year-old boy, or however old you are in kindergarten, I don't know. And with a 48-year-old man today, it's like, if it's what's next, like you said, we both have other things today, right? We're not going to just shut down and, in our day after this. But if we're focused on those now, one, we may think it's better, so I can't hear your words, I can't soak them in. Or two, I'm not able to give you what you may need to hear today either. And that's what I find was missing to me when I was depressed, because I went into this singular focus. Now, I talk a lot about self-leadership, but I wasn't living it then. I was selfish. And selfish to the point where it destroyed me and potentially destroyed others. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, because, from a theological perspective, you're way more advanced than me. So I'd like to pull some truths out of that.
You're 100% right. I'm actually working on I'm working on a couple of books right now, but one of the projects I'm working on, and I'm stealing this from a pastor I grew up with, and he just said, "What's the next first step?" Like, and it's such a simple, like, duh kind of thing. Like, of course. And I mean, we see this in so many areas of our lives. And I know, like, you've shared a little of your journey, like, just even when it comes to like things like being healthier. Well, what's the next first step? Like, you can talk about the 6-pack abs and benching 300 pounds, but there's got to be a next first step. And yes, you want to have the thing out there, but like the Bible talks about God being a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. And so the lamp to my feet only gives me another step. The light to my path does give me a little bit of where I'm headed. So it's not like I can't have any idea of where I'm going, but there's something really, really powerful about, okay, what's the next first step? And like I said, we see this in health and fitness. We see this in, coaching. I'm sure you use these types of concepts in coaching. It's interesting to me that we really don't employ that in spiritual growth. We don't. We think in terms, like, there's an ideal of what we think we should be spiritually, or what we think others should be spiritually, for those of us who are in ministry. And it's like, well, you should be at this point, or you should be reading your Bible this much, or you should be sitting cross-legged with your arms up praying X amount of hours, or on your front porch with a moleskin journal and a cup of tea, whatever it would be. And I'm not making fun of guys who are some of those kind of monastic practices are really, really good. But there's something about, how do you help people, or how do you talk about self-leadership? How do I determine what's a next first step? And so obviously it's going to start with, do I know where I'm standing? Right? I got to assess where I'm standing and just be honest about that. Like, I remember sitting on a park bench years ago, with my Bible in hand, looking at a lake and just saying, God, like, I want to be more self-disciplined in my time reading and stuff, but I'm not. Like, I don't want to be where I'm at, but this is just where I'm at. And so if you want me to change, I'm going to need some help, because there's a lot of things out there that will distract me and that seem a lot more interesting than reading my Bible, right? And so just my ability to just sit there and be like, here's where I'm at. And so now I know where I'm standing. And then it was, okay, what's the next first step? Okay, it isn't going to be to read the whole book of Romans today, because then I'm aiming too high and I'm guaranteeing failure, right? Versus going, you know what? I'm going to read one piece of one Psalm, and I'm just going to think about that one piece of that one Psalm today, all day. And maybe I'm going to write it on a Post-it note so it kind of triggers my memory, and put it on my dashboard or put it on my desk or whatever. And so this concept of thinking in terms of one next step, like, what's the one next step? So where am I? What's my first next step? And then living a life that's about intention more than addition. So it isn't fixated on just adding a bunch of things to my schedule. Because look, like, if you're a single mom with 2 kids working full time, and someone comes along and goes, you should really be spending about 30 minutes to an hour a day and reading your Bible and praying. It's like, bro, whose life are you living? Like, that's not going to happen. Right. And it'd be easy to go like, well, what's your higher priority? Like, you should love Jesus more. Right. Like, I mean, it's easy to say those kinds of things. It's just not reality. And so what does it look like just to be intentional about time that you have? So maybe as you're dropping your kids off at school, you're praying for them in your heart, like, while they're talking and singing and screaming and whatever else. And maybe as you're doing laundry, you're thanking God for providing, right? So you're intentionally living your moments with God, rather than just adding more things to your schedule so that you feel like you're checking spiritual boxes. And I have found that, like, this idea of just next first step, it very much echoes the Psalm 37 stuff too, but it's like, I just feel like it can apply to our spiritual journey, no matter where we're at, whether you don't believe at all, but you're curious, or whether you've been like me, where, I've been in and around the faith now, and in a professional Christian, as you would call it, for many years. I still have a next first step every day. And really every moment of every day. And again, like, I've just been, the older I get, the simpler I want things to be for me and for others. I'm tired of complexity.
Yeah. No, I like that. That next first step too reminds me of another thing about Christ. It says he grew in wisdom, stature, favor of God, favor with man. Well, it's grew in all those areas. And I mean, you could break it down theologically what each one of those means. I say stature's physical, wisdom is, more knowledge of your knowledge, skills, and ability of your job, knowledge of scripture, and then favor with God and man. I mean, I think that's really cool. That's one thing that, like, for a long time, and I think when you get depressed, anxious, panicky, you forget that whole connection, that human connection, which is kind of taking it full circle. That's what got you into it. It was the community and the brotherhood. I'm reading a book right now, and it says for men, it's very important to be surrounded by men to help and support you, because, look at the life of Christ again. He didn't do it alone. He had 12 disciples. He had multiple friends. We talked about Lazarus earlier, all these people in our lives. And I think that next first step is, hey, what is, a lot of people are famous of, I forget who said 1% improvement every day. Well, maybe it's a 0.5% improvement. And I like, especially what you said about the busy moms. Yeah. A lot of these people that say cold plunge, sauna, all this stuff, journal every day. Well, that doesn't work for most people, but what works for you, and that's where going back to dwell in the land. What is your land like? Maybe your land's a little messy or a little bit time constrained, and maybe getting better isn't doing more. Maybe it's finding the time to do less. So,
100%.
There's different ways.
and I would say like God's not the Russian judge in figure skating at the Olympics holding up a scorecard every day. Like, that's not the heart of our God. Like he's not just going, ooh, I give today a 5.2. Like, good job. Like, you passed. That's not the heart of our God. Our God. So like, you have kids, right? I think you said
I don't have children.
You don't? Okay.
No, I don't know.
Okay. So, but you can still identify with this. When a baby a baby learns how to walk, it takes a step and then it falls over. There's not a parent on the planet that goes, stupid kid only took one step. Right? No one does that. What do? We celebrate the step. Like we cheer. We're like, yeah, he took a step. He fell on his, little butt afterwards, but he took a step. And I think that we often think of our disposition about God, or our belief of God's disposition of us is I didn't really do anything today. I didn't really, I really didn't even think about him. And he's like, no, my love for you has nothing to do with how well you love me and follow me. I do. God wants us to love him and follow him because he knows that's what's best for us.
All right.
He doesn't need us. He desires us and he delights in us. And so even if the person that is totally turned away from God, but just barely moves an eye a little bit, he's like, yeah, like that's awesome. Like, and I think that like it frees us of this performative thing that like, I don't have to check a box or mark a thing. And again, none of this says that spiritual disciplines aren't important and that we shouldn't develop these things. Like, of course, like 100%, but no discipline that isn't born or isn't fueled by affection is going to hold long-term. Like I didn't start I started to have affection for my wife, and then I invested the time in. Right. And so it was like, and once I was like, oh, she's hot. It was like, okay, I'm diving into this. I'm pouring myself in. And then it's like, hey, we should spend some time together. Hey, you want to go out to dinner? Hey, I'll make a little extra money so I can pay for it. Like, it was like the discipline was cooperating with the affection. And then there's a point where also it's like, well, yeah, but I can't just ride on affection because the you complete me kind of stuff is just not reality that we see. And so then in order for that affection to continue to grow and deepen, I do need to discipline myself, right? That's any relationship. And I would say a relationship with God is no different. Like there's an affection piece and there's a discipline piece. And both of those things, again, more art than science, play with one another. But it starts with like, God, I want to know you. I don't know you. I don't know if I know you, but man, I want whatever that is. And we have a God that says, cool, we can start there. Like I'm good and I'm not in a hurry. And there's not a bunch of these hoops that I feel like you have to jump through. Like we can work with that. And then to just, again, okay, what's the next first step? Maybe it is telling a friend, maybe it's going to church. Maybe it's opening a Bible. Like, who knows? Like, it's just wherever you're at, start there and see. And then, the scripture is very clear that God says that those who seek me will find me. And if that's a promise, then I don't have to like stress about it. You don't have to stress about it. We can be available to people as they have their questions and want to walk down that journey, but we don't have to strong arm or force things or systematize everything. Like we can be at rest in that.
Man, beautiful discussion. And once again, I've run out of time to talk to you more. So we're going to definitely have to do this again and pick up on some more of the things because we didn't even touch some of the questions I wanted to ask you. But before we get out of here, I just give us a summary, a word of encouragement to get out of here, and then make sure you let people know. And because you're probably not going to do it, I'm going to do it for you. But I didn't know this, but for about a half an hour before we filmed this, but Dustin has come out with this amazing album. You all have to go listen to this guy sing because it'll make your life better. His voice is amazing. The production's amazing. So his new album, In Wild Days, make sure you put that in there because I know you well enough, even though I don't know you at all. You can probably leave that out. And of course, his book, The Wilderness Way as well. Let people know how they can get that. I think you just have a landing page where they can see all that stuff. But go ahead and get us out of here on a positive note.
Yeah, totally. More positive. To be fair, I didn't sing on much of the album because I don't like the sound of my own voice. And so in order for me to be able to listen to it, I got better singers than me.
Okay.
So it is in my voice. I mean, my voice is in there, but it's not the predominant voices. But man, yeah, the easiest way to find me is at dustinkleinschmidt.com. All the book and resources and coaching stuff is all hubbed there. And then, you know, I would love to talk to anyone who has any questions or anything. And my encouragement would be those two things we've already said. Look, God delights in you, and it isn't because of wherever you think you should be. He loves you as you are. Our God is not in love with the future version of us. He's in love with us. And because of that, every day his mercies are new. And because of that, we can just take a next first step. And whatever that next first step is, take it and know that all of eternity is cheering you on as you take those steps.
Oh, Dustin, wonderful hour with you. Thank you for your time and for your story and for your passion for others. And for all those who are listening, I can't say it better myself. Today's self-leadership lesson is, what's the next first step? Make sure it's not a target fixation on the wrong thing. Make sure it's a step in the right direction. But the more you do this, the more you'll be able to lead yourself, bathe yourself in kindness, joy, love of yourself, of God, of others, and just see where it takes you. So until next time, thank you for listening. Have a beautiful week, everybody.